Welcome to Sunday Night Prime, and I'm always happy to have you join us this evening. Catholics, Protestant, Orthodox, Jewish, Muslim, anybody else, even a few agnostics. We're always happy to listen in. Unfortunately, we don't have call-ins anymore, but certainly you can always write me a letter, and you can mail it Sunday Night Prime at EWTN.com. So I'd be very grateful to hear from you. And a number of people drop me little notes. Our visitor this evening is Carolyn Simons. Welcome, Carolyn.
Thank you, Father.
And Carolyn comes from Dublin, and she's very active with pro-life. In fact, your organization is called
The Pro-Life Campaign.
The Pro-Life Campaign in Ireland. And a great many of us, I was explaining to Carolyn, many of us are naive about Ireland. Our relatives came 100 years ago, 50 years ago, and they think of old Ireland, and it was very positive, very devout, and very 100% with the church. And over the years, it's not a surprise, countries become more secularized. They have people of all different points of view, and so in Ireland, your work is busy for you.
Very busy.
Very busy. Now tell us, what do you do? Oh, tell me about your family.
Well, I'm married. I live in Dublin, very near to where your relatives live as well. We have 5 daughters from 14 to 24 years of age. They're all living at home. That's not unusual in Dublin. I have 3 who are still in school, in high school, 1 who's in university, and 1 who's doing her professional exams to be an attorney like her mother and father. So that's the story of the family. It's a surprise for my husband because he's one of 5 brothers. He never had a sister.
Isn't that interesting?
Yes, it's very funny.
And your husband also is from Dublin?
He is, he's from Dublin, yes.
And
my parents, I'm first generation Dublin. My parents would both have been from west of the Shannon, so they're real Irish people. My husband,
they're from where?
West of the Shannon River,
west.
Which really means it's the west of Ireland.
West of Ireland,
yes.
Sure.
But you know, it's funny listening to you talking about the Irish who came to the States through New York all those years ago. One of the things my father always said when any of us left home, left the country, and which all the Irish who came here for generations would have left their homes with, was the sound of the parent saying as they left, "Keep the faith."
Keep the faith. Oh, yes.
And I'm so impressed that so many people in America have done.
Yes.
You know, even walking down the road to your studio here this morning, I was very surprised to see statues of Our Lady outside people's houses. You never see that in Ireland now.
Well, I was explaining that is an Italian-American custom. You wouldn't see it in Ireland.
That's
you
true.
would see it in Italy and Sicily.
Yes,
and
yes.
we have a great many Italian-American Catholics here in Yonkers, along with a lot of Irishmen.
Yes.
So we're delighted, and it's too bad it's not St. Patrick's Day, but you can't do everything.
Yes.
And you know, in New York, the biggest parade every year is the St. Patrick's Day parade.
I do.
But it's the people who march are not only the sons of Ireland, but the nephews of St. Patrick. And they're Jewish and Afro-American and all sorts of things like that. The faithful nephews of St. Patrick.
It's a wonderful spectacle. And I know that in the St. Patrick's Day parade in Dublin, what makes it so special is always the cheerleaders and the groups that come from America.
Yes.
They really are so lively and so Irish, so proud of their Irish connection.
Well, I think in Ireland, St. Patrick's Day is a holy day of obligation.
Yes, it is.
Which it is not in this country. A good many go to church, but a good many don't go to church, but they have a good drink.
I know.
Yes. Somehow or other, drinking on St. Patrick's Day in Ireland is not an appropriate thing. It's a holy day.
Yes, yeah.
But, well, we're going to talk about pro-life in Ireland. And it's very interesting for our audience that here we need to talk about pro-life and opposing abortion in Ireland, because we have this naive vision of a completely Catholic country. And it's a different, I should say that I had good friends who belonged to the synagogue in Dublin. Have you ever gone to the synagogue?
No, I haven't.
It's painted green. I went there, yes.
Yes.
And I was very well received. I gave a talk. Well, now, let's talk a little bit about the situation with pro-life in Ireland.
Well, it's funny. I mean, the last time I met you was earlier this year when I was over around St. Patrick's weekend. And the reason I came to America with my friends from the Family and Life organisation in Ireland and Pro-Life Campaign, and we had 2 Irish senators and a parliamentarian as well, was because we wanted to say to the people here in America, don't be complacent about our position in relation to pro-life issues. I had never realised how terribly important the pro-life position in Ireland was as a beacon to the pro-life people in other countries around the world, particularly here. You know, we've been fighting a kind of a lonely fight in the sense that it was just on our own island for well over 20 years at this stage. But the organisation that I volunteered with 20 years ago, in fact, came into existence in the late 1970s. And at that time, it was felt that there was a big discussion beginning in Europe on abortion and abortion rights, which was beginning to be heard and felt in our island. And numbers of pro-life groups began to form, and my own group, which was then called the Pro-Life Amendment Campaign, was a group that initially was made up of 12 obstetrician gynaecologist patrons.
Is that so?
Yes, and all of the professors of obstetrics and gynaecology in Ireland at that time. And it was a group that came together in the conviction that medicine as practiced in Ireland doesn't deny any pregnant woman any medical treatment that she needs in pregnancy, and that we don't need to have recourse to abortion for any complication of pregnancy. And so those stalwart obstetricians and gynecologists did a wonderful job, and together with a couple of lawyers proposed to the government that we have an amendment in our constitution that would give specific protection to the unborn baby, while at the same time always looking after the equal right to life of its mother. So an amendment was put to the people in 1983. And I think when the votes were counted, about 78% had voted in favour of that amendment. And so from 1983, we have a specific protection in our constitution recognising the right to life of the unborn, and it says with regard to the equal right to life of the mother, they will defend the right to life of the unborn. And everybody was happy with the position and everybody understood the position. The Medical Council, which is the governing body for the practice of medicine in Ireland, issues guidelines every few years, and their guidelines would have said that abortion was never medically necessary, was always professional misconduct. And in recent years, their most recent guidelines say that the doctors have a duty to look after the health, the best interests of the mother and the baby. So we have an extremely good and high standard practice of medicine. And even though the Irish doctors would look after women who have very serious complications of pregnancy sometimes, they never, ever take the route of terminating the baby's life first before they treat the mother. They will always look after both patients. So that was the position until 1992. And in 1992, when I became involved, a 14-year-old girl was raped and became pregnant and wished to have an abortion. And she went to England with her mother to have that abortion. And while she was there in one of the clinics, I think the suggestion must have been made to her that if they took a certain type of medical sampling, they could send it back to the prosecutors in Ireland to see if a case could be taken against the man who had made her pregnant. And because of that, our police force realised that there was a constitutional issue and that it wasn't as straightforward as just giving permission. So they issued papers for her to come back to Ireland, which she did. And when she came back, this case started in the Supreme Court in relation to how the unborn she was carrying would be protected in this situation. The child was still there at the time the case started, yes. I understand she had a miscarriage afterwards. But the Supreme Court then had to consider this issue. And it's really very extraordinary for something this important. They didn't have any medical evidence before the court. There was no obstetrician gynecologist, there was no psychiatrist, there was no medical doctor. There was simply one psychologist who said that in his opinion, this young 14-year-old girl was very depressed and that if she didn't have an abortion, that she would probably commit suicide. And on the basis of his opinion, the Supreme Court interpreted our Constitution as giving a right to abortion where a mother's life was at risk, even if that risk was her own threat of her own suicide. So that was the position in relation to the law. And I'm at the UN this week and I see that in their table of abortion policies across the world, they list Ireland as now allowing abortion where a mother's life is at risk. So I'm going to have to clarify for you, how is it that if that case was decided 20 years ago, we actually still do not have abortion practiced in the island of Ireland?
But the UN puts it there, which is what we call in Jersey City a phony. It's a phony. Phony, okay. And my father was the engineer who built the United Nations building. Okay. We know it quite well.
I see. Well, it's my first time, so I'm just finding out about it. Anyway, what happened after that was there was a lot of shock, and particularly among the pro-life community who had voted in huge proportion in favour of the pro-life amendment back in 1983, and who never suspected that the wording could ever be interpreted to allow the killing of unborn children. So there was pandemonium, as you can imagine. There was huge sympathy for the girl. And there was one master of one of the maternity hospitals who said afterwards, in evidence to a government committee, that yes, you know, she was depressed and she was tearful. He was her obstetrician privately. And he said he would have been tearful as well, but he seemed very uncomfortable with the idea that her case was being used to have abortion. So ever since that case has been decided, the pro-choice lobby have been pushing hard to have the government bring in legislation to have abortion practiced in Ireland. And we've had a couple of other referendums in relation to whether there should be information given in relation to abortion, which is now allowed in the various pregnancy advisory clinics, and also in relation to the right to travel. No woman who wants to go outside of Ireland for any reason is to be stopped, even if it's suspected that it might be to have an abortion.
I don't understand that.
We don't. Well, there was a lot of questioning over whether or not we could prevent people from travelling abroad to have an abortion, when in the Constitution you had to protect the unborn life. But naturally, nobody wanted to be imprisoning anybody on the island, and so that was passed. So it still left the question of abortion itself open. And there have been a couple of cases since then, one of a child who was in the care of the state, who was brought when pregnant to England for an abortion, and who has said afterwards how much she regretted it. But you don't hear her story in the mainstream media, and you don't hear the stories really of the women who have had abortions and who regret the decisions they've made, or of the women who went to the clinics and were going to have abortions and changed their minds. We don't really hear them. But the issue has become extremely active within the last month, within particularly the last 6 months, because of actions taken in the European Court of Human Rights.
I see. We're going to have a break here in a few seconds, but I want to hear more about this because obviously there's a drama going on here with Ireland. And the powers of darkness, I'm not talking about people, would destroy as possible they can what can do the faith of the Irish people. So we'll be back in 2 minutes. Carolyn, I was making the point that we American Catholics, and particularly of Irish descent, half Irish or completely, we think that everything in Ireland must be all right. And of course, it's unrealistic. No place in the world is free of original sin, including Ireland. And James Joyce used to prove that very well, you know. I used to read James Joyce. Now, why don't we talk a little bit about this particular case that you were talking about, where the case of the girl.
It's the famous X case. It's the Irish Roe against Wade. And it's the case that the Supreme Court decided in 1992 would be interpreted to mean that our Constitution allows abortion where a mother's life is at risk. And as I was saying earlier, they accepted that a serious risk to her life, which would justify an abortion, was her own threat of suicide. So, as I was saying earlier, there was no medical evidence before the court. And so we would say in the pro-life movement in Ireland that the Supreme Court didn't have the proper medical basis for the decision that they made, and that the basic premise for their decision has been discredited, and very roundly discredited, in the 20 years since they made the decision. So, you know, particularly even in relation to mental health, the studies in the last few years have shown very clearly that a woman who has an abortion is much more likely to be suicidal than a woman who doesn't.
Yes, that's perfectly obvious.
we know that that's the fact, and it may not have been clear then, but certainly studies like the Coleman study and other studies in recent years have proven that very, very satisfactorily. So, looking at the other complications that exist, one of the things that Americans will be interested to hear, because in America, pro-life can sometimes mean I'm against abortion, except where a mother's life is at risk. And we would regard that as a corruption, if you like, of medical practice here, because our doctors in Ireland don't practice abortion. They look after a pregnant woman and her unborn baby. So when they see a pregnant woman, they have two patients to look after. And despite the fact that we do not have abortion in Ireland, the latest report of the UN, which was published with the World Bank and I think UNESCO in 2010, there was a review internationally across 172 countries of maternal mortality statistics, and Ireland comes out with the least number of maternal deaths, and that is without abortion.
Isn't that interesting?
And people don't know that.
Ireland is the least in the whole world?
Well, I think it's always down at the very bottom or the second from the bottom, but it is always notable that even though we don't have abortion, mothers are not dying. So for any American out there or anybody out there who's listening, pro-choice or pro-life, who says abortion is sometimes necessary to save a woman's life, we would be the proof that that's not the case, and to say it is in fact dishonest. And so even in relation to the suicide element, the government is being asked now to legislate to allow the practice of abortion on the basis of our Supreme Court decision. And if they do that, it's going against the evidence of mental health research. It's going against the instructions of the Medical Council, which is the governing body of the practice of medicine in Ireland. And it makes no sense, because not alone will it be inimical to the child's health, because the child will die, but it's also bad for the mother. So it's not good practice to be introducing abortion on a basis that doesn't exist. So, the pro-life campaign and Family and Life have been coming to America to say, please don't be complacent. Please talk to your Irish-American connections, to your families, to your politicians, and say to them that you regard Ireland as being a beacon in the pro-life community worldwide that needs protection. And, we might ask, why does it need protection now? Because this debate, even in our island, has become international, and the influences and the interferences in the national debate on abortion are international. And one example I could give you in relation to that is we always see Planned Parenthood International. I hadn't heard of them until recent years. And last October, there was a court case before the European Court of Human Rights taken by 3 women living in Ireland who said that for various reasons their constitutional rights were not being observed when they were not getting abortions in the country. And they took their cases to the European Court of Human Rights. And International Planned Parenthood sent a lawyer called Julie Kay from America to represent those women in the fight against the Irish government before the Court of Human Rights in Europe. And Julie Kay came on primetime Irish television and, told Irish people really what they should be doing about abortion, and explained why she said the women of Ireland were not being properly looked after. The court decision has been used by the pro-life, or by the pro-choice lobby, I beg your pardon, since, as a request to the government to beat them over the head with, to say now you must legislate for abortion under the Irish X case because the European Court of Human Rights said so. But Father Groeschel, the European Court of Human Rights didn't say so. It always recognises, and it did in this case, recognise that the Irish people are entitled to decide for themselves what protection they want to give to the unborn and whether or not we want to have abortion in Ireland.
I believe also there are a number of Muslim countries that are absolutely opposed to abortion. Yes. I'm
not an expert in the Arab world, but I can see from being at the UN this week that an awful lot of the support we're getting is from the group of Arab countries and from Iran in particular and from Egypt in particular. They are major contributors on the pro-life ethic at the highest level of the negotiations that are going on this week at the meeting for the Commission on Population and Development at the UN here in New York.
It's something of an embarrassment that in the international scene, the loudest voices pro-life are the Muslim nations, the Arab countries.
Well,
Thanks be to God that Ireland.
Well, I would have to say, I'd have to explain now in defence of our own Catholic Church that when I was here with you last March, I was invited by the Papal Nuncio, the Archbishop Chulicat, who is the representative of the Holy See at the Vatican, to join his delegation. So I'm here actually in New York this week as part of the Vatican delegation to the UN. And the chief negotiator is doing a sterling job, I mean a fabulous job, on behalf of the pro-life cause.
By the way, this is on the side, but I want to congratulate Ireland on the new apostolic nuncio.
Oh yes.
Was one of my students.
Yes.
Right here in the seminary.
Yes.
Archbishop Brown.
Yes.
Charles Brown. And I was just delighted to see that he has been made apostolic nuncio to Ireland.
Yes, I've met him once, and I have great hopes for him because I think he follows in the traditions of the fearless churchman who will speak the gospel. And, you're so lucky that you have had a very vocal hierarchy, particularly in recent months in America, and I hope that we'll see the very same in Ireland, and particularly with the influence of our new Papal Nuncio.
I'm hoping to get that new nuncio on this program very shortly.
Yes.
I'll be mad at him if he doesn't. Well, now, here we have Ireland in a unique position because the Muslim countries are not representing the Catholic position on life. They're representing a biblical position of the Old Testament, thou shalt not kill. God bless them. I'm sure that the Catholics in Egypt and in, where else? What other Muslim countries?
The North African countries,
yes,
many of them,
they're pro-life. Isn't it sad that in Europe, where did it go?
Well, we have Ireland, and we have Malta, and we have Poland that don't have abortion.
Oh, that's great.
And that still hold the line of protection for all life from conception to natural death. And those views are being expressed at the UN, at the EU, the European Unity Committee meetings, and anywhere where decisions are made that might have an impact on this kind of thing. So we see interesting groupings, and yes, I suppose it's unlikely bedfellows that we would be negotiating with and talking with people from the Muslim countries, but we do share the wish to protect our unborn children, our born children. There's a lot of discussion about the kind of comprehensive sexual education which the UN is talking about, the kind of reproductive health services that are being talked about, and we do share a lot of common ground, so it makes sense for us to be talking to each other. Equally, I'm not surprised. I was at the UN in Geneva last October, and at the UN here this month in April, it's been interesting to see the same countries critical of a pro-life ethic or the absence of abortion, which some countries would like to see made a human right. And I hope everybody in America realises that there is not one international constitution or charter which makes abortion a human right. Abortion is not a human right anywhere in the world.
Is that so?
That's so. I mean, there are people who are trying to
we
make
did not
it one.
know that.
I know, isn't it funny? Because it's because the pro-choice lobby is so effective in getting their view across. And it's up to us to be discerning and to be critical about what we read. And, you know, to look for the highest standard. And it is very important that people realise that Ireland is the example when anybody says, but you need abortion, at least you need it to save women's lives and their health. You know, the answer is, look at Ireland. They don't have it. And the UN has accepted they have the best maternal mortality rates. They're always the leader in the field. So it's very important that we keep going with this. It's important that we get support from everybody of pro-life view, from every faith, from every nation, from every pro-life organisation, and particularly at this moment, from every politician. Now, I'll tell you a little bit more later in the programme about what is happening in Ireland on the political front in relation to this, and what kind of activities the pro-life groups have been engaged in.
At the end, our last segment, I wanted to go into the politics
Yes.
of it all. Here's an interesting observation, though. There are countries in the world now that would think they're completely accepting of abortion. For instance, in the Scandinavian countries.
Yes.
But the Scandinavians are disappearing. They don't have babies.
I know.
If you want to kill off a nation, stop getting kiddies. And many of the Scandinavian countries now have lots of Catholics, particularly from Philippines. Isn't that an interesting thing?
It is. And, you know, it's interesting. This is another discussion that I'm seeing coming up. I've been here this week, as I've said, at the meeting of the Commission on Population and Development. And all the members of the UN are working very hard to agree a resolution, a document that will come out of the week's meetings. Now, it's been a huge shock to me that the vast majority of the discussion and the submissions are being made in relation to population and methods of population control. I would have imagined this was the work of conspiracy theory, but in fact it's true. And some countries...
Make that point clear.
It's very important that people realise that, you know, it sounds very interesting to be dealing with a document on population and development. But many of the countries from the Arab group, from the African countries, are observing at the UN meetings that there isn't enough discussion of the development aspect. And there's a huge amount of discussion on matters to deal with sexual reproduction rights, which many of the countries you've just named interpret as meaning a requirement for abortion. Now, one of the things that you've hit on, and I'm so glad that you have, is this myth in relation to population and the need for abortion. Before I came here last week, I was very interested to see that Melinda Gates had been to Europe.
What?
Melinda Gates had come to Europe.
Yes.
She came to Berlin about 3 weeks ago to launch a new campaign for the Gates Foundation, which she says is not controversial and which seeks to introduce contraception as widely as possible around the world. The difficulty is that she's talking about abortion as well, I think, but she's not casting it in that light. It's just interesting to see, you know, the groups that are coming together. The Giving Pledge people have as their sole purpose the reduction of global population. They agreed that at their first meeting in New York at the home of Sir Paul Nurse, who is the head of the private Rockefeller University. And that has been their underlying reason for existence, which isn't known.
I'm going to get you. We're going to have a break.
Yes.
You need to explain this to our audience.
I will.
Many people live in different parts of the United States. And in Europe, they would not be exactly what's going on with those names.
Yes.
So we'll be back in a second. Well, Carolyn, before our break, we were just moving in on the subject of population. Now, many of our audience, we don't think of population because in the United States it's very large. We have huge population. And the population goes up right now, not so much because of Anglo people, but particularly people from Mexico and from Latin America. And we constantly still get people coming from Africa as well. Years ago, all of the immigrants came from Ireland, England, Europe, Italy, you know. I was part of that Irish-German entrance in those days down by the Statue of Liberty in 1850. But now we have this very interesting population trouble, difficulty, frightening. Tell us about it.
Well, I was mentioning just before our break that, you know, Melinda Gates and Bill Gates have been concerned about population for a long time.
Gates, now tell us about
the Gates couple, who are very much in the news now in Europe and in America because of this wonderful giving pledge that they've started. They asked the world's wealthiest billionaires to give half of their wealth away for charity. The problem is the charity they agreed on was basically to reduce global population. So this would be the subject of another whole program. But the only thing I wanted to say on it here is that right across Europe last year, a census was done. And it's now clear to everybody that even Ireland, which has got the highest fertility rate, the highest number of births in Europe, even Ireland has fallen below the number of births you need to keep your population at the same number.
Is that so?
So if you like, in that sense, Europe is dying. The populations are being decimated. And the first country that published its census results was Bulgaria. And Bulgaria said their birth rate was so low, they had immigration, they had no immigrants coming in, unlike in America. They were so worried by what all of this means for their older generation and for pensions and all of that kind of thing, that they asked the Council of the European Union as a matter of urgency to start thinking about things like resettlement programs. And this is a big issue. When I was at the UN, I'm listening to countries like Russia and Belarus recognizing that they have a population program or problem the other way.
Russia?
Yeah, they have a demographic problem. They're not having enough births. So, you know, it's interesting. The fertility rate is falling everywhere, even in some of the developing countries. And we've seen the problems that are being caused by the one-child policy in China and the gendercide policies that you see being used in certain communities, Asian communities, even in America, and you know, communities in Asia itself, whereby girl babies aren't wanted. I know one of the big American magazines had an article on gendercide recently. Population isn't being cast in the way we need to see it, and certainly the statistics are showing we need to be very concerned to look forward and say what kinds of societies will we all have in a few years' time if there isn't a young generation, particularly in the developed Western world.
Well, there's another fact that they have told us about, that when a population goes down in a country, it's very difficult to get it back up.
Yes.
Yes. Once it starts down, it doesn't go with like a wave.
Yeah.
No.
I remember even a few years ago being on holiday in France and seeing big posters of beautiful, happy, chuckling babies, and the little logo on the poster was "Have a baby for France." You know, so people are concerned about these things. So again, it's an example of, you hear a claim and you have to look at it and say, is this false? Is this real? The fact is, we all need to be concerned about the falling birth rates. And we need to be concerned about the ability of the people who are left in the workforce to shoulder, by their taxes, the older generation, the pensions and the services that we all take for granted. And it's a very serious problem, and it's worrying an awful lot of people. So when you hear global overpopulation, or when you hear, you know, the Gates program talking about making family planning services available and all the rest, realise what it entails, And you can look on the Sunday Times website. There was an article about the Giving Pledge. It sounds wonderful with Ted Turner and Oprah Winfrey and Bloomberg and the Gates and Warren Buffett. And you think this must be wonderful, but it's all about reducing populations. And I remember
They want to reduce the
They want to reduce the populations. And I read in the English Financial Times, Bill Gates was asked where he saw himself in decision making in the world, and he said he saw himself as a decision maker in the new constitutional order. So it's just a little idea to throw out there to people that population isn't always the issue that some people would like us to think that it is. But it's interesting. I mean, it's an interesting thing to think about. Getting back though to the pro-life issue in Ireland, this is electrifying the nation at the moment. Within the last week, a socialist member of our Congress presented a bill, a piece of legislation, which she wanted to have discussed and passed, which would have brought abortion into medical practice. And she called it the Medical Treatment Bill. But as I've explained to you, it isn't medical treatment. It's not necessary for any complication of pregnancy. And as we expected, the bill failed because the other political parties were not going to allow it to go through. That isn't any reason for complacency, however, because our government has appointed an expert group to consider what must be done because of that European Court of Human Rights decision. And as I said to you, some of the pro-choice lobby are saying Europe has told us we must now legislate for abortion. As I've explained, Europe didn't say that. It said the Irish people get to decide that, the Irish government gets to decide it. But they pointed out that because the Supreme Court said there were circumstances for abortion, we have to let women know when those circumstances arise. And as I've said, our answer to that is 20 years of medical research and evidence have shown that the basis for our Roe and Wade decision is not valid. So we say we must reflect that. All of the evidence now says that abortion is bad for mothers, and of course it's lethal for babies. So this week, I was just checking on my phone in the break. There have been 4 major primetime Irish television programmes, major debates. In every single one of them, there has been no representation of the point of view we share on life issues.
None?
I do mean none. I was on a primetime programme called The Late Debate just before I came here. There were 4 panellists. 3 of them were against me, and the presenter wasn't very helpful either. I've heard that there have been 2 others this week, and in each case it was 2 against none.
That's outrageous.
And
in the United States, you wouldn't get away with that.
I'm sure they'll have to allow a balance as we go on time-wise. But what was really interesting, Father Groeschel, is given that it was the week when this bill was being discussed in the Dáil, it was also very interesting that 4 women came out in the public arena and they said that they went to England for abortions in circumstances where they said it was medically necessary. And so I'll have to explain why they said that. They were each told by their doctors that the babies they were carrying had fatal abnormalities and they wouldn't live for very long after they were born. And so they thought they would be entitled to get terminations. They didn't want to wait for nature to take its course. And you might ask, well, what happens in Ireland in that kind of situation? One of the other hats I wear is that I'm a governor of the largest maternity hospital in Europe, which is in Dublin.
You are?
I am. I've had a long association with it through having had a very premature baby 24 years ago, and ever since I've been involved in a Samaritan committee on the hospital, and now I'm a governor. And in our hospitals in Ireland, if a child is born who we know isn't going to live long after it's born, like a baby with anencephaly, whose skull and brain doesn't develop properly, that baby they put a nice little hat on the baby is given to the parents, and for whatever number of hours or whatever time that baby has, the parents hold the baby and they're photographed with it and they bond with it, and the baby is baptised, and there's a proper funeral and there's a proper mourning that's gone through. And this extraordinary situation where 4 people came out at the same time, you know, who had been told in very unusual circumstances that their babies were not going to live for long. One of them had been to England 6 weeks beforehand only to have a termination. the fact that they came out was unusual, and the timing of their coming out when a bill was before the government was unusual. And partly it came from the fact that our leading newspaper of record had 2 articles over the previous month of women telling their abortion stories. And these 4 women had contacted this journalist and had told their stories and then decided to make it public. They got huge publicity. Our most
Huge publicity.
Our most watched primetime television programme last Friday night is called The Late Late Show. Those 4 women, I think, or maybe 3 of them, were on last week. There was nobody to counter what they had to say. They gave their very heart-wrenching stories. I mean, they were awful stories. I was brought to tears listening to one of them. They told their stories to the people of Ireland, and the people of Ireland, I'm sure, were emotionally very swayed by what they had to hear. But the thing we have to remember is just because a baby isn't going to live for long doesn't mean that we should be allowed to hasten its end or to cause its end. Once we start thinking along those lines, where does it end? I mean, if you look at anybody who isn't going to live for long, somebody who's terminally ill with cancer, somebody who's very old and infirm, a child who's told it won't who you know won't live beyond its 4th or 5th birthday, do they have a less right to live just because of those infirmities? Or are we the kind of society that cherishes and nurtures all children of the nation equally, born or unborn, young or old? And I think that's what Ireland has always been. We have been a Christian, nurturing, cherishing nation. And I must say, I would not like to see that change. So the pro-life campaign that I've been involved with had a very big campaign over the last few weeks, asking people to send e-postcards to every politician in every constituency of the country. It was hugely successful. All of the other groups were doing the same. Family and Life and we came to America to tell our American friends, you need to know that this is going on. You need to contribute to the discussion. You need to know that your pro-choice lobby is interfering in our democratic process and our national debate. So we want to hear your voices as well. And the time has come for us all to hold hands across the Atlantic, to share information and resources of people and time and all of those kind of things in order to continue to uphold the life ethic, which, as never before in the history of the world, I would say, is under siege, and most particularly in Ireland, which was the beacon for so many countries for so many centuries.
Well, you know, our EWTN audience here, obviously, is primarily in the United States, but it goes into Europe, it's in Ireland,
Yes.
England, it's in France, it's in Italy. I was in Rome, and people were talking to me about the program in Italian.
Yes.
They could understand it in English, but they didn't speak English.
Yes.
And in Latin America, there's a lot of people hearing this program. And I think it is so imperatively important that people watching this program, who are by no means only Catholics, but the kind of people who watch this program and EWTN are people who would be pro-life people.
Yes.
All the way.
Yes.
And I hate to say this because I'm one half Irish. Both of my grandmothers, Murphy and Hickey, and I'm Irish descendant of a relative, Cardinal Logue, Archbishop of Armagh, first Irish cardinal in my family. I'm disappointed that there is this, things are so confused in Ireland. Now, we Americans, we forget, we don't know. Ireland is a modern country. It is a secular state. It doesn't have an established church. Good thing it never did. But how important it is for people like you to speak out loudly and clearly in Ireland, because many countries in Europe were once Catholic countries, and they are far, far away from that. Look at France, how that it was once the eldest daughter of the church.
Yes.
And there's always a wonderful 10 or 15% of very loyal Catholics in France. When you go to church in Paris, you see them right there.
Yes.
But in Montmartre. But how much we have to get people around the big cause,
Yes.
and that is
Life. Yeah, I think it is the defining
Yes.
issue of our age.
Yes.
And I'm living on a small island on the periphery of the European Union, where we have countries like the Netherlands, who practice euthanasia, whose Minister for Health passed a measure last fall, which allows for mobile squads to come to your home to euthanize you if you can't make it to hospital, which has about 4,000 euthanasia cases every year, and at least a quarter of them, euthanasia is not asked for by the patient or the family.
No.
I'm serious. People need to know these things. They need to know that the whole value for life is being diminished. And, you know, even in Ireland, when we come to the area of assisted human reproduction, the lobby that wouldn't respect life, that is at the cutting edge of the science in that area, is extremely active in Ireland too. That area is not regulated, and there are things being done that wouldn't be allowed to be done in Germany and Austria. So in this cause, the pro-life campaign, Family and Life, and all the other life organisations are doing everything they can. You know, no stone will be left unturned. We work with the Medical Council. We make sure that they have, well, we don't work with them. We make sure that the Medical Council has all of the information and the latest research. They may have it already. We make sure that they do have it. We make sure that the politicians who are prepared to speak out are as fully briefed as we can help them to be. You're right when you say we have to speak out. The difficulty is there isn't always a forum. The national-run television and radio station doesn't always want to hear us, and that's been particularly clear in the last week. And so, you know, stations like EWTN, I have to say hello to my mother. It is so important that they have got a global footprint, that they're seen, as you said, across Europe and across America, and that people can get on websites afterwards. You know, look at the look at prolifecampaign.ie, familyandlife.org, and you'll find an amount of information that will show you exactly what's happening now on the ground in Ireland.
I'm glad that you're speaking of EWTN, because you know, our dear mother Angelica is quite ill now and very old. She isn't able to speak, and she's still very sharp. I want to tell you that, the eyes. But just think of this little sister changing the world.
Yes.
You know.
Yes.
And it's a marvelous thing. And so I'm sure that probably Ireland listens more people to EWTN percentage-wise than many other countries.
Yes.
Yes.
And do give Mother Angelica our love from Ireland, won't you do that?
Well,
She's very popular. You're both very popular at home. And it's been a huge honour to be here on your programme.
Well,
I'm so grateful that you've given me the opportunity to speak for everybody in Ireland who shares this view. Because we know that people are listening on your show, and we know that the people who listen on the life issue are also the people who get up and do something about it. So it's very important, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity you've given me.
Well, I'm so grateful that you spoke up, and you know, as I say, half my family is Irish, and long ago, but they look back at Ireland as sort of heavenly. Mm. And when I finally got to Ireland, I walked around Dublin, and it wasn't the heavenly Jerusalem. I thought that it was,
yes,
but it wasn't. Mm. The interesting thing, which is worthwhile mentioning, and I was surprised. I always wear my habit.
Yes.
And a couple of times on O'Connell Street, I was accosted people said nasty things.
Really?
It never happens in the United States. Never, ever, ever. But I suppose when you have faith there, you will find the enemies of faith. And I think that's there in Ireland. God bless you, Carolyn, and please, Ireland forever.
Keep the faith.
Erin Gorbara.
Thank you, brother.
And now let's say our prayer. O Lord, be with us. And we thank you for this great message of life. And we ask you to guide us with the Holy Spirit. And all of us, Catholics, non-Catholics, to support human life, which is God's own gift. May God bless you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. And as always, I have to ask you to support EWTN and Mother Angelica. I know that many of you are very supportive right now. There's an economic difficult time, but I'm noticing that our friends, and not only Catholic friends, supporting EWTN, please send them out the messages in. Send those little envelopes in, and you can make it out to EWTN or you can make it out to Mother Angelica. Don't make it out to me. God bless. We'll see you next week.